welcome audience. This is the panel discussion with senior data scientist recruiters talking about helping out people who want to hire or to be hired. So we've got Howard Fishman of Analytic Recruiting, Linda Burtch of Burtchworks, Scott Brosnan of Motion Recruitment. This is a production of the San Francisco Bay Area ACM, or Association of Computing Machineries. So the ACM was founded in 1957. So as a meetup, we're a bit older than meetup.com. We're founded as a nonprofit to promote knowledge of modern computing, or focused on creating community, support networking and hiring. It's only $20 for an annual membership. We have 140 or so past talks on our YouTube channel. So we have 2 monthly meetings. We have a general computing meeting, typically the third Wednesday of the month, and a data science SIG, or special interest group, typically the fourth Monday of the month. And we like to support networking, job announcements. If anybody on the event would like to share any hiring that they're doing, go ahead and post it in the Q&A section of Zoom. If you have questions, I'll be monitoring those in the Q&A, and I can read questions to the panel. We also have other questions prepared. So we have a joint meeting schedule with various societies like IEEE or ValleyML.ai. These are some upcoming events that we have. So Thursday this week, Silicon Valley ACM SIGGRAPH, AI-driven photorealistic human digitization. And then I've got different color codes for our different channels. In the general computing, we have a panel, Practical Realities of Consulting, on Wednesday in February. Later on in February, we have deep neural nets, our kernel machines. So Pedro has published a number of neural net books and papers. And he's also a very good communicator. This is kind of key at helping to understand how deep learning works, as well as being able to describe deep learning models. Then in March, we have AI trust, adversarial attacks on AI ML models, and defenses against attacks. So Bhairav has been a speaker for a number of times at ACM. He's currently a principal manager at Microsoft in the Azure core operating system. Then later on in March, we have deep dive into AI and deep learning infrastructure with Lambda Labs. So Lambda Labs creates servers with lots of GPUs in them, if you want to use that for deep learning training. And in April, we have lessons and opportunities in large-scale networks and smart health applications. So check our meetup site for SF Bay ACM, and you'll find our upcoming events. Use the Q&A in Zoom for questions to the panel. As a moderator, I'll be reading those. You can raise hand or chat if you have technical questions. For long questions, it would help to I would recommend you moderate length. I can read questions in different parts, but it's good not to have something that takes 3 minutes to read the context and a 5-part answer. If you can break it down a little bit, that would be helpful. Please be close to your PC when you speak. So that's aimed at the panelists and myself for better audio recording. If you do have announcements for jobs, you can put that on the meetup comments. That'll last there after the event. If you want to do it during the event, you can just put it in the Q&A, and then everybody in the event in the Zoom can see that. So now let me introduce the different panelists. So first we have Howard Fishman, Managing Director of Analytic Recruiting. So Howard, why don't I turn it over to you, and you can speak to your background and
Sure.
let me know when you want me to page over.
Sure. Greg, thank you for having me, and I'm excited to talk to you and give you my thoughts on the market. My name is Howard Fishman. I've been with Analytic Recruiting for over 15 years. The firm has been in business for almost 40 years. And my background was, prior to going to recruitment, I was in direct marketing and industry at agencies, and I worked during the late limited.com era. And I still have stock certificates posted on my wall that are worth absolutely nothing now. So anyway, about our firm, we focus at data analytics at all levels. By data analytics, it's everything from traditional statistical modeling to database marketing analytics to credit risk management analytics to data science to digital analytics to supply chain analytics, anything, anything that requires use of data to make business decisions. And we're pretty broad. We cover all the major industries. We do a lot of work in the financial services industry, from traditional banking to fintech. We work with the tech firms like the Amazons and the Microsofts of this world, pharma, retail, advertising and consulting, logistics, supply chain. We work across all industries and all sizes. So we've been fortunate that even when there's been a downturn in a particular market segment or industry, there's usually been enough to, there's always been enough hiring going on as well too. And we do everything from analyst over to senior executive levels, and we've been very successful. And like Linda, we're also recognized as Forbes' most noted recruiting firms as well too. Just a couple of observations. My next slide, Greg, I don't know if you can do that. Here's just overall what we've seen, and I know it's probably a question in everyone's mind. We find, to our surprise, the market for data science folks and data engineering and BI remains very competitive post-COVID. There was a downturn, but the market recovered quicker than we had imagined. And I think most companies are already starting to grapple with how do we best move our business forward in the wake of this new world that we're living in. So far, we've seen, as a result, little downward pressure on compensation. We find that good, strong candidates are entertaining multiple offers and still are able to sort of pick and choose where they can go, with some differences, of course. Certain industries are quite not as robust as they used to be. Should be no surprise to anybody. For data science roles, technical skills matter. What I mean by that is that as the market evolves and as the technology evolves, as its platforms evolve, candidates and hires need to be adaptable as well too. I remember when I first started 20 years ago, we used to say no SAS, no pass. Now, of course, it's all Python and SQL, and if you're working in SAS, you're considered a dinosaur now. Also, we're finding that it's great to be technical, and it's great to be a data scientist, and it's great to know data and know how to develop algorithms and all those things. But at the end of the day, most of our clients are coming to us because they see data science as a tool to solve larger business problems that need to be solved. So candidates who we've seen who are successful for the types of roles we fill are generally able to translate technical concepts to solve business outcomes. And the last thing, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this, is that in the wake of COVID, virtual interviewing, hiring, and onboarding are here to stay. Even post-COVID, I see there's going to be some sort of hybrid between working remotely and coming to the office, and the whole interview process, I think, is evolving as well too. So those are just some top-line observations. Thank you, Greg.
Okay, thank you. So Linda, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Linda Burtch. And again, thank you, Greg, for hosting this and inviting me to attend. I'm looking forward to some really interesting questions. First, let me tell you a little bit about Birchworks. We have been in business now. This is our 12th year. And I've been doing quantitative recruiting now for over 30 years. So we are one of the leaders in analytics and data science recruiting. And I don't want to go through everything that Howard just went through because we do pretty much the same thing. I think there's some differences in a couple of areas. We also do contract recruiting for the quantitative professional. We also do retained work too. We do recruit across the country, again, pretty much any industry. And it's amazing what's happened in the last 10 years with the quantitative discipline and how it has reached across so many new industries and places where you never thought it would be. I mean, I never thought we'd be working with a cement company, but we do. So there's just all kinds of, from startup to the very mature organization. So it's really been lots and lots of fun. I'm a very active member in the American Statistical Association, as well as sitting on some boards for the Informs. And I give a lot of talks, and we're in the press quite a lot. And we are recognized by Forbes as one of America's best recruiting firms. So I think let's go on to the next slide. That's enough about us and what we do. One of the things that we're most known for is our salary study that we've been now issuing for 8 years. It has data from over almost 2,000 quantitative professionals across the country in all kinds of different disciplines. And we compare the different segments. So we divide it up by location, by the industry, by the level somebody is at, and so on and so forth. And we collect this information through one-on-one interviews. What we don't do is send out a mass mail asking people what their salary is, because we know that there can be a lot of exaggeration, or some funny things could happen. So we only allow people to contribute to this if they're willing to have a conversation with us about it. So we will stand by the data that's in the data science, in the salary studies. One interesting thing that happened over these last couple of years is the data salary privacy legislation that's happened across the country. And it's really interesting, because I would say still 90% of the people we talk to are willing, very willing, to talk about their compensation. And I've always said that salary transparency is the best plan, because if people don't know what other people make, that's when the funny business starts. It's when everybody knows what everybody makes, then there's fairness. So I actually, a quick aside, I told my 24-year-old son this story about how, my belief in salary transparency. And he's a software coder, and he works with a group, and this is his first job. He's like a year and a half out of school, right? So he goes in and he asks everybody on his team what they made, and they all disclosed what they made. And I thought, well, Jay, maybe, I'm not sure that was such a great idea, but he did it anyway. And, kudos to him, I guess. So, and I will parrot some of the things that Howard said about the potential impacts that the COVID crisis has had on salaries. Interestingly, our collection period runs from April 1 to April 1. And so our data is going to be really interesting and clean from pre-COVID and the year starting 12 months after COVID. And I would agree with Howard that the salaries in the last, let's say, 4 months or so have bounced back in a really strong way. Before that, there were still a number of layoffs going on, and there was a lot of, especially the retailers, anybody who was working in hospitality or transportation, airline transportation, not UPS. They were having problems. And as a result, they spilled on the market fairly quickly. And nobody knew when the end of it was going to be. So there's some people in that April to June period who took positions, and I think at compensation lower than had they waited 6 months in what they could have gotten. So we'll take a look at the data. It's too early to say, but that's what I suspect is going to come out of this the salary study this year. It also did impact people's ability to negotiate, but not anymore. Gone are those days. Candidates are moving on and off the market very quickly and getting multiple offers, as Howard said. But there's other things that'll be really interesting to talk about during, and I know that Greg's going to ask some questions around this, around work from home, and is that here to stay, and all those kinds of things. And we have some data on that too, because we've done some surveys. So next slide. So, and this is what I think we're going to get into. What's the general feeling about work from home from both a candidate and a client perspective? And then are companies actually going to move to permanent remote options? Have we seen that? A little bit, not as much as I would have anticipated though. And then also, you know, the bonus season is right now. So are people getting bonuses? What do those numbers look like? And again, ask questions around that because I brought some interesting data that we've seen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now, Scott?
Yeah, hey, thanks a lot for having us, Greg. So I don't want to bore the audience with super run-on because I'm sure they're here to ask some questions and really get into these things. But Motion Recruitment, we've been around for 30 years. Our model has always been local IT staffing. We fill both full-time perm and contracting roles. We're in 16 major North American cities, and each city, it says 15 here, we're just opened up in Seattle. So our model's always been localized and specialized in our local geographic markets. I myself started in our San Francisco office, went to Boston for a few years, Chicago, and back here in Silicon Valley and head up our region. We have 4 specific teams in Silicon Valley that do a specific technology. I run the team that focuses, as you know, Greg, from working with you, just data science roles, and really make sure I pride myself on really understanding everything that's going on in the local data science marketplace, hiring, who's leaving, companies doing well. So that's a little overview of us. I think, you know, we weren't necessarily surprised to see a huge bounce back, at least here in Silicon Valley after COVID. A lot of the problems all these companies have set out to solve were a reality in COVID and remote world and work from home, and making solutions easier to real life problems became real world. We saw that in March, and we've seen things just get more competitive now than I've ever seen it in my career here. So again, thanks for having us, and excited to hear some questions and hear some perspectives.
Okay. And if you wanted to comment on state of the market, or?
Yeah, I guess we're just, you know, we've seen the tech market here it's fully back. There's no tailwinds coming into 2021. We saw things bounce fully back months ago. I think one of the things we always see is whether you're hiring or looking for a role, I don't think there's ever such thing as the perfect job nor the perfect candidate. I'm not sure that truly exists. I think what we've seen, and you know, companies that make the most successful hires and that actually are hiring in this ever competitive market seem to be the ones that are able to move the quickest. And it seems to me the candidates that are getting the best offers are the ones that are decisive and saying, this is the job I want, this is the salary I would want, let's go make it happen. And those seems to be the candidates that get exactly what they're looking for. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Just briefly about me, I'm the panel moderator, just asking questions. So I've got a background in being hired at across 7 startups, gone through 3 exits. I've been hiring and building data science teams since 2010. So my current Foghorn Systems, I've grown a team from 2 to 12, and it's partly in Sunnyvale and partly in India. So now for some first panel questions on Zoom Q&A. So Dave asked, what data science boot camps do you think are most respected by companies? And Morgan had a tie-on along those lines, what boot camps are considered equivalent to having a graduate degree in terms of job requirements. So maybe I'll let you go, just Howard, Linda, and Scott, if you want to comment on boot camps.
Well, I mean, there's certainly boot camps, and there's that I think that are common and being used. One is the New York Data Science Academy in New York, which also does remote work. There's Coursera is now offering a full array of data science courses that you can get certified for. And I've seen many people who started their career in other industries take these boot camps as a way of sort of segueing into the data science world. Having said that, I have to be honest, I still think that the most desirable candidates are those that have the right graduate degrees. I mean, because the fact of the matter is, boot camps are like, it's a credential you pay for. Not that you don't pay for college, you certainly do, but I find that the candidates that are most desirable, who are really working on really interesting machine learning algorithms or really interesting business problems, are the ones that have a graduate degree in a quantitative discipline. But I would say for anyone who is looking to gradually get into the field and get into a role that may not be pure data science, but may be more associated with analytics or decision sciences, boot camps may be a way to go.
Okay, thank you.
And on that, I have I would agree with most of what Howard said, and I'll add to that. I mean, all of you folks out there who have advanced degrees in math or operations research or statistics or physics, you know that math is a process of building. You can't learn math in a 14-week boot camp format. It takes years of training, and that goes into any data science application that you're working on that's at all sophisticated. If you want to become a business analyst, yeah, maybe you could take a boot camp and get there. But again, it's, the stuff that data scientists do get very, very sophisticated when it comes to the mathematics, as well as, the computer side and the coding side of things too. So I am not a big fan. And most of my clients also, they just, they tried it first, when boot camps came out 3, 4, 5 years ago. And, it just didn't work. It just didn't work. What do you think, Scott?
Yeah, I hate to I think I agree with what Howard and Linda said. Just, the most desirable of these boot camps, it's tough to learn in 14 weeks what some folks have done 4 years in an undergrad, a master's, and then a PhD have gone and learned. I think I've seen some folks come out of, a Galvanize of the world and not do well on interviews and not do well, and some do fantastic. I think it really comes down to the individual person. Say folks don't have the classical training from the, bachelor's, master's, PhD, things like, having GitHub accounts or Kaggle competitions and, doing those things as supplemental. I encourage, that versus the boot camps, but it's just so based on the person, I think, than just, if you go to this boot camp, you'll have better success than the next. I think it's really all about that individual, but it's tough.
Yeah.
It's like the same reason you wouldn't go to medical boot camp to work as a doctor. It's the same thing. It's a certain level of academic training and practice that you need. So I would agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I also think it depends on what your foundation is too. If you have a foundation in, let's say, statistics, but you've been working in, doing something else for a few years, and you wanted to get back into it, boot camp may be the way to go to get you back in, because a lot of these boot camps work pretty hard to develop relationships with companies. And so they were putting their people in various organizations. So if you can, if you're considering a boot camp, I tell people the most important thing to ask is, okay, tell me where your graduates have gone, and then talk to some of those graduates about the program. You've got to make, and what percent of the graduates actually got a job in analytics, in data science. Those are really important questions, because it's an expensive proposition. And in many cases, people come out on the back end with nothing. So just be careful.
I would say, Linda, I agree with you about having a base. If you consider a boot camp, adding on the last 10% to its already strong mathematical base or software development base, maybe you're a database engineer and you want to get into data science, but you're already a strong programmer. Maybe you've already had some applied math background. If you want to add a boot camp on top of that foundation,
right,
where you're already mathematically literate, and now you're just learning different function calls and different mechanisms and different ways of applying things, that's probably where the boot camp will give you the most bang for your buck if you're kind of transitioning. But other people have come up to me and said, how do I transition into data science? And I said, well, have one skill that you're already competitive on. whether it's database or Java or something else that can get you in the door, but then get in a team where maybe you start off peripheral on a project that's doing data science, and then you get more involved in it over time. Maybe project one, you're just around it. Project two, you do more hands-on, but you're not a critical path. Then, if you can do something like that, and you had the bootcamp skills to say, oh, I know what a regression is. I know what a decision tree is. I know what a neural net is. That would help you with that transition. But I wouldn't from high school to bootcamp. Wouldn't work.
Right. I think coding is a different story. The coding boot camps, my response would be different, but not data science boot camps.
Yeah, because you need the strong math foundation.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. Sue asked a big question here. Can you talk about one, the different roles and functions requiring data science beyond the pure tech ones, building new technologies with machine learning, for example, targeted marketing. And two, how demand for these roles differ between large established companies versus startups, especially startups in the Bay Area. So maybe we'll just mix up the order. Scott, if you want to go first. And also the Q&A you can see on your screen too. So the first is different roles, functions requiring data science beyond the pure software dev. So like targeted marketing isn't really what you train for in computer science, but it's a good application for data science.
Sure. And I think there's, so many different industries now that have data, and it's how do we use this to make better business decisions? How do we use this to advance our products? Even in the gaming industry, the medical industry. I mean, if you look at any industry that really exists, you're gathering data and you're trying to make better business decisions around utilizing it. There's no shortage of those companies out there. I think to the second point, I think the question was large enterprise, companies versus small startups and the demand. We see just as much demand from startup companies, if not more, than some of the large enterprise level companies. I think some of the startups out there in Silicon Valley, sometimes their hiring needs are more urgent than a company like an Amazon or a Google or a Facebook. One of those companies gets a job filled now or 6 months from now, really isn't affecting their bottom line, really doesn't matter. And so that's why we see those hiring processes take months and months and months versus, smaller companies that have a real legitimate urgent need that are interviewing, because if they don't get a role filled now, they're missing a customer deadline. They're missing something that needs to get out the door right away. And there's a little bit more of a level of urgency with, startups. And, Greg, from working with you, I know that, there was urgency. There was a need to get your role filled, or there were some serious consequences that would happen versus some of the large enterprise level companies. It's, well, if we get it filled now, great. If it's filled 6 months from now, it's really not going to make that big of a difference. So it's actually depending on a candidate's current situation and what their career goals are and aspirations are. Going to a startup sometimes has that advantage versus the large enterprise level companies.
Thanks. Linda?
Yeah, and again, I would agree with almost everything that Scott said. I might add a little bit to it. I think in a large organization, the benefits to working in a large organization are that it tends to be, there's more time for training. So if you're a newbie and you need a little bit of hand-holding, working in a large company to start is not necessarily a bad place. Also, you get focused in one particular application area. In a small startup situation, the pace is much faster. So, you really, you're working hard. Your contribution is obvious, which is, one of the things that I hear all the time. People who are dissatisfied with working with a large organization, they're then ready to get into something where their ability to influence the organization as a whole is something that they find very satisfying. So that you can get in a smaller company that you cannot get in a large organization. they both have risks. I mean, I think a lot of people have this thought that I think is not right, that if you're in a big company, you're not at risk. You are absolutely at risk in a large company. At a small company, the advantage with a small company is you kind of know when you're at risk. In a large company, you might not know that. And all of a sudden, the company goes through a layoff and you are, one of the numbers that gets laid off, I think, and so, there's ways to combat that, but, those are some of the differences between large and small. I think the other question, and I don't know that the first question about,
it was about different areas to apply data science, different fields, I think.
Right. And I was kind of thinking,
example.
I was sort of taking that question in another direction and thinking about, well, what do I need to know in an organization besides the analytics, the quant, the technical side of things? And I think it's really important for, this is said time and time again, but it's so important. The ability to influence change in an organization is absolutely critical for success. If you can't do that as a quantitative person, as a quantitative leader, you might as well go home, because it's, because if people's eyes glaze over every time you come into the room and have something to say about the project you're working on, you're in trouble. So the ability to influence change is really critical, and it's something that a lot of people really struggle with. So you really need to think about how to hone that. I'll stop there because Howard probably has things to add too.
Well, I have just a few things to add. Taking the first question first about the difference between large and small companies, I agree with everything you said. The one other advantage in working for a larger company is that there's intellectual capital. There are people you can bounce off ideas. There are centers of excellence. You're working with people with like minds who can help you look at problems or develop your skills in different ways. Often I talk to data scientists who come from small companies, and one reason they're looking to leave is because they feel there's no one else that they can learn from, that they're the only one there. They're reporting into the CEO. The CEO really doesn't understand what they do. So some of them are actually looking to go to larger organizations where there's a culture of data, and there are people in place who can help develop your skills in a way that you couldn't have done before, or to work on different types of problems in a way that you couldn't work before. So that's an advantage of working in a larger organization. In addition to all the other advantages that were mentioned before. But again, and some large companies have entrepreneurial units embedded within their companies that are tasked with being able to sort of develop applications and being able to roll them out pretty quickly. So I think you need to not just look at whether a company is large or small, but look at the culture of the company. Are they really committed to using data to solve business problems? I mean, which leads to the next part of the question about what kind of applications are being used. One of the things I've worked with a lot of the traditional financial services and banking and insurance companies that have not been considered to be, cutting edge or in terms of applying the latest tools and techniques. That is starting to change. Large banks, financial services firms, insurance companies all want to be nimble like fintech companies, and all want to be able to, and they're all drowning in data from call centers, from social media, from so many other external sources. They need people to make sense of it, and they need people to figure out how we can monetize it. So whether it's doing social sentiment analysis to look, or natural language processing to understand consumer sentiment, that's an area that's huge right now. Natural language processing, the ability to do speech processing or do location processing, those are areas that I've been seeing tremendous growth and demand for as well too. But the most important thing I just want to stress is that when you take a job as a data scientist in a company, you really have to make sure that it's a company that's really committed to leveraging your skills. A lot of companies pay lip service to data. We got to hire data scientists. You get in there, the infrastructures are not there, the databases are not there, and there's a disconnect between what management is saying they want versus what they can deliver on. So I think it's important to really understand the culture of the company and say, is this a place where I can really drive change and grow the business?
Absolutely. I have heard that same story of people getting into situations where the data is a mess, or nobody wanted this except for the CEO, or there's all kinds of situations like that. So if you're considering going in, and especially as a leader, you want to take that head spot, that top spot in analytics in a fledgling analytics organization. Be careful. You need to ask a lot of questions about the commitment, the data, everything. It's critically important because we've seen people make mistakes.
A data scientist without data is like trying to run a grocery store or restaurant without groceries.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't
work.
Yeah. You can serve ice water and hot tea, and that's about it. Okay. Let's see. How would a graduate degree in data science from Northwestern, UIUC, be valued? So by Amar. So Amar, I would say one thing is you could take a look at the salary surveys, like the Burtch salary surveys. And also I would say it depends a lot on your vertical, if you have other vertical experience, and also your geography. Because if you can kind of combine, if you think of data science as detective work, and what you apply that detective work to, what kind of crimes are you trying to solve? What kind of problems are you trying to solve? You have some kind of vertical expertise, whether it's finance or fraud or security or something else. If you can have something to apply to, that would also help with your value. Maybe this one I'll start with you, Linda.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on how would a graduate degree in data science be valued? And they were asking specifically to Northwestern.
Right.
I don't think that would be off the top of your head, but how would a person kind of value that, I guess, when they're getting started?
It depends on the graduate program, because again, like the boot camps, there's now in 2007 there was one master's degree in business analytics program, North Carolina State University. There are more than 200 now. I think it's like 270 or something. It's some crazy number. So you really have to look at what's involved in that master's program and what it's going to do, because there's a lot of master's programs out there right now where it's more like a business analytics and it's light. You're doing a lot of work in Excel, and then it can get to the very complex work where you're heavily coding in Python and you're working on some very technical issues. So, it's hard to say, it's hard to compare one program with another without really looking at the curriculum of that. Even Northwestern has two programs in advanced analytics, right? One is within the communication school and the other one is in the engineering school. So I'm not sure which one you're referring to, but the one in the engineering school is a very strong program.
Yeah, and I would also add to that a lot of MBA programs now offer degrees or specialties in analytics as well too, and that's something that is relatively new as well too. So you get an MBA with an analytics concentration, and again, it depends on the nature of the program and how rigorous they are in terms of Python and coding. Typically people come out of those programs are more business people with an analytic mindset as opposed to a data scientist.
And I think when looking at a program, looking at maybe who the professors are in that particular program, or what, like kind of what Linda was mentioning, looking at the track record of that program to see where people that graduated, where they then went on to. I know a few years ago, there was this new master's program that came online from San Francisco State that was relatively new. And all of a sudden we saw candidates coming out of that program getting more offers than, some folks with PhDs from UC Berkeley. And I did some research and it turned out some of the professors that they had within that program were just incredibly impressive individuals that in their own right had risen through the data science ranks, were directors at top tier Silicon Valley companies, and then were teaching. So the students then were obviously learning from the right people. And if you follow kind of the track record of that program, you'll see some people at some very high level companies here in the Bay Area. So kind of came out of nowhere. But that was pretty interesting to see.
Thanks. Victoria asked a question directed to you, Linda. Can you explain why coding boot camps are different? Also, any particular one better than the other? And others can answer afterwards, but I'll let you start, Linda.
Yeah, you know what, I'm not an expert in the coding boot camps, but I do know that, you know, again, you have to have some foundation. You can't go in cold. And you have to also have an interest and passion for coding in order to start and be successful on the back end. But coding is something, I mean, I don't want to say it's easier because I don't know that it's easier necessarily, but it doesn't take as much buildup like math does as a discipline. So data science, I mean, I don't know. And Scott, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about this, because you might, you know, blow me out of the water on this one. But I've always thought that math is a lot more complicated than computer science and coding. I don't want to say computer science because that's too general, but coding specifically.
And thinking about my previous answer really quickly, just going back, if anybody's looking it up, I think the program was University of San Francisco, not San Francisco State, if anybody's going back to look that up. But, you know, I think for the boot camps, whether it's software engineering and coding or data science, I think it does go back to kind of what Greg and a few have said, is like, what was your core skill set? Or what was your core foundation going in? And, you know, I'm not trying to talk negatively on the boot camps, because I'm sure that there are some phenomenal ones out there. We just don't see the same success level of somebody coming out of a 14, 18-week boot camp to going into it. You know, I only recruit for Silicon Valley companies. It could be different in other parts of the country, but it's just impossible to learn in 14, 16, 18 weeks to what you've learned in 4 years of a computer science program. So I don't look at them too much differently as software engineering, data science. I think it's the person. We've seen some individuals that have done a boot camp and do amazing at software engineering interviews, and those teams in my office they're getting roles, and then the same boot camp, a candidate go and face lots of rejection. So I really, truly just think it depends on who that person is, what they're learning, how they're applying it, how much they're then practicing at home and doing individual projects on things like GitHub and showcasing it and building things and tinkering is kind of what we see. It's the boot camps they're tough, and they've popped up all over the place because I think they do very well financially because they promise a lot.
And they cost a lot.
They cost a lot, they promise a lot, and I just urge people to proceed with caution, just thinking that they're going to go get this boot camp. And I know they promise a lot. Oh, you're going to go get this job here, here, and here. And some do, I'm sure, but there's a lot that don't.
Yeah, and I would say boot camps are good. Let's say that you were, quote, a statistician, data scientist, and you've been working for SAS for a number of years. If you're already at that level, a boot camp may be good in terms of teaching you coding skills in Python that makes you more marketable. So again, it's sort of saying that if you already have a base with which to work on, then the boot camps can help you augment it, help you fine tune yourself. But other than that, I agree with Scott and Linda. I think again, having the foundation is what's key.
Absolutely. Thank you. Let's see. Abolaja asked, what kind of opportunities would you recommend for a graduate and bachelor's degree in statistics who wants to work in data science? So again, I would answer to that, you know, you'd have your statistics as a background. So look at the job description. If they're mentioning statistics and data science, that would probably be easier than a place just mentioning data science only. But again, if you have any vertical skills to combine with that, that would help. You know, if you basically look at the job bullets and if you match all the minimum requirements, that should be fine. But there could be areas of statistics that you could cover that don't overlap so much with data science, and other areas of statistics that overlap a lot with data science. So I would just say it kind of depends, but take a look at what the needs are of the job. Let's see, Scott, you want to start off again?
Yeah, sure. And I would agree with what you've said. And there are certain roles out there that are very much stats oriented, and maybe your software engineering skills aren't as relevant, and vice versa. I think one of the questions we'll actually ask a company when recruiting for them is, are you looking for somebody heavier from a statisticianal background that's very good with stats and numbers, or are you looking for more of a software engineer, coder that knows stats? Because I think there's a big difference between the two. And I think you'll see certain sorts of companies that, a statistician might be very relevant to what they need, but I think it comes down to looking at that job description in the bullet points. And if there's things that call out heavy stats, that's probably where you should gear your efforts, versus somewhere that lists heavy, software engineering, coding, Python as the primary skill set. I know there's a lot of companies that will specifically say where you're looking for a degree and somebody classically trained in statistics, and those will be probably the roles to go after. So I don't think you'd say this specific company, that specific company, but just really looking at what the job description calls out for and what a company needs.
And some companies are starting to have AI ops. So where a statistician could develop a model and throw it over the wall, and the AI ops person, operations person, can put it into production. And they may have more of the software dev background with some overlap into exposure on the AI terms or stat terms and math, but not have to develop it. So sometimes if they have a division of labor in some companies,
Right.
that could be an option too.
And to kind of piggyback off of that, that's where the data engineers kind of emerged.
Right.
You remember 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, the data scientist was called a unicorn, right? Because they had to be able to munch the data on the front end, develop the models, and do their statistics in the middle, and then deploy the models, right? On the front. So on the front end and the back end, they were using kind of computer science skills or software engineering kinds of skills. So they labeled those as data engineers. So it's a whole new discipline that we've gotten pretty heavily involved in, actually, because there's so much demand. And sometimes I'm asked the question, when you're developing a team, how many data engineers do you need per data scientist? And it's usually 3 to 1, something in that kind of range, because there's so much work that needs to be done. I mean, and back 7 or 8 years ago, you probably all remember talking about or reading about how the data scientists would spend 80% of their time either munching or deploying and not really doing data science applications. So that's changed now with the advent of the data engineer, which now the data scientist, the quantitative person, is doing really what they were trained to do. In a smaller company, though, sometimes you're doing it. You are the unicorn. So you've got to do it all. In a larger organization, almost always now there's data engineers to do the front and the back end work.
Yeah, I just wanted to make an observation about the use of the term data scientist. In some ways, it's become kind of like the flavor of the month. Everybody is calling themselves data scientists. Companies say they want data scientists.
Right.
And when you ask them, when a candidate says to me, I want to do science, I want to do data science, and I ask them what that means to them. What does that mean to you? It turns out they're doing SQL queries. They're doing Excel spreadsheets. They're doing statistical modeling. So when you say you're in a career in statistics and you want to move into data science, you need to kind of be specific about what it is that you really want to do. Because some companies will hire for data scientists. They'll post it as data scientists, and they're classical statisticians, or they're doing data engineering, or they're doing BI. So this still seems to be some fuzziness in the industry around the term data scientist and what that really means. Capital One, for example, is a case in point. They renamed all their statisticians data scientists. I have people doing digital analytics in their organization, they're data scientists. So I would say to any candidate who says, I'm in statistics and I want to go into data science, you need to really think about what kind of things are you really looking to do that you're not doing now, and orient yourself accordingly. Same token for any hiring managers are on the line. When you say you're looking for a data scientist, you need to be very crystal clear about what you want this person to be doing. If you want this person to be building models, then maybe you're looking for a statistician, not a data scientist. If you're looking for someone to develop machine learning model using AI, using PySpark and C++, then you're probably looking for a data scientist. So just be very, very clear with yourself about what it means for me to be a data scientist.
You know, also in our data science salaries or our salary studies, we divide the data scientist from what we call the predictive analytics professional. The predictive analytics professional we define as somebody who is working with data that's primarily structured already. And the data scientist is the person that's working with very unstructured data, or data that's streaming, that's coming in huge volumes, or vision data or text data. That kind of thing. That's a data scientist, whereas somebody who's working with structured data is a predictive analytics professionals. Their salaries are different too. The data scientists will have a higher salary at the same level than a predictive analytics professional. So, but there are many more tools now that are coming out that are making the predictive analytics professional a lot more powerful than they've ever been able to be in the past, and getting much, much closer to what I would call a data scientist type application. So I think what we'll see is those salaries kind of working closer and closer together. So, but there's been a very distinct difference between the two over the years.
Interesting to talk about the definition of data science as a role. There's a group, the Initiative for Analytics and Data Science Standards, IADSS. So they're at a number of data mining conferences. Osama and Hamet are the founders of it. So just the way you get accounting and you take an accounting test, and that defines an accounting professional. They're trying to start the discussion and the dialogue over different conferences and also with universities. So what's a definition of a data scientist? And what's a different definition of data science training? So look up IADSS, Initiative for Data Science, Analytics and Data Science Standards. I'm on the advisory board for that. But that's been going over for about 3-4 years now. So that would be a good thing to be involved in, or people who want to learn more about data science as a profession to check out. Where do strong data engineers come from? What degrees and expertise do they have? How do you attract them to your team? So this is a question from Monica. So where do strong data engineers come from? Howard, why don't you go first this time, just to take.
Yeah, they tend to have backgrounds in software engineering or computer science as opposed to statistics. They're generally trained, they have graduate degrees from top schools, both in the US and elsewhere. They tend to start off doing, so that's the basic baseline for that. A lot of them come out of technology firms and software engineering firms. And then they can be moved, and so they typically have backgrounds in SQL, BI tools, Python, software development, whether it's C++, have worked with cloud-based solutions, I would say, is critical right now, whether it's AWS or Microsoft Azure. And they come from, and then a lot of them come from, again, a lot of the good data engineers that I find come from traditional companies where they're looking to help build out a data architecture for the firm. So people who come out of insurance companies and financial services firms, people who've come out of places like the Amazons of this world. I'm even seeing people now who come out of retail, where they were responsible for building out huge databases and data infrastructures to support e-commerce applications. So that's typically what they come from. And they usually have a confluence of software engineering, some machine learning, a lot of business intelligence skills, can be hands-on. The best ones tend, even if they're management, they tend to be player coaches, because they can get into the weeds with the data and be able to kind of demonstrate to the team what needs to be done. But they really come from diverse I mean, in terms of work experience, they come from diverse backgrounds. But again, they all have the strong underpinnings of coding and computer science or industrial engineering or something similar to that. That's what I've seen so far.
Yeah, and it's hard to say because data engineering is pretty young.
Yeah.
It's again, only been around for 6, 7, 8 years. The thing I wonder about into the future, I don't have an answer to this, is what's the career path for a data engineer? And I don't know what it is. What do you think, Howard? Where can they go after that? I mean, because there's not, I guess they could become a chief data officer at some point.
Yeah.
But how do they do that from data engineering? I don't know.
I've heard of directors of data science, but not directors of data engineering so much.
Right.
At least not yet.
Right, not yet. And that's a good point. There may be at some point. But they'd have to go back up the IT ladder, and a lot of times data science is under strategy, it's under a CMO, it's under the chief of operations. It's not under IT. So that's a problem, and I don't know that there's a real answer to that yet.
Well, I'm working on a search now for a company where the data engineers falls under data governance.
Yes.
Again, which is sort of amorphous. I think it's something that'll eventually will shake out in the same ways that in the beginning, where did predictive analytics report into? Who took ownership of that? I think the data engineering discipline is, as Linda said, is evolving because it's so new. It remains to be seen. There are some data engineers that have been working data engineering for a while, and they've worked on machine learning solutions, and now they want to transition more to a pure data science role.
And that's not easy.
And it's not easy.
Yeah,
I agree.
One of the teams in our office, their tech discipline and their focus is primarily back-end software engineers, whether it be Python, Java, C++, and they have yielded the most successful, they now do the data engineering placements because it's most of the folks that have a very strong software engineering background, and along with what Howard was saying with cloud computing, but so much now into microservices and distributed systems being just absolutely critical in that realm. We've come across a few roles that the title is director or head of data engineering, because maybe it's a startup that nobody's really had ownership of that before, and they kind of need a subject matter expert to try and fall underneath a VP of engineering or a CTO, and the title is head of data of engineering. So possibly could be a career path as it becomes more and more relevant, and we see it come up more. Like Linda was saying, it's only been around for 7, 8 years, this title, but I think time will tell where that career path falls into.
Thanks. Another question, this is from Daryl. What's a low stress ML ops jobs do you recommend for a seasoned but aging software engineer re-entering the market after 4 years in unrelated fields? So just before others start, I would say, when you're looking for more of what you're calling a low stress job, I would say, take a look, and I'm interested in your feedback, recruiters, like a Glassdoor employees ranking companies, best places to work, where they talk about, are there a lot of complaints about high stress or not, or how well are employees treated? That's not specific to one vertical or another. It's just a management style and the individual company's priorities, because companies are people. And so who are the people you're working for and how are they rated? So I guess I'll turn it over to maybe Howard first. So I guess there's two levels. One is specific to ML jobs, and also another part is for a seasoned but aging software engineer to re-enter the market after 4 years. And if you have any comments on things like the different reviews of companies, that was something I added, but it's kind of related. Howard, go ahead first.
Oh, yeah, Glassdoor is a good place to start. Although you have to be careful with Glassdoor, because sometimes I find with Glassdoor that people who tend to post on Glassdoor are either people who are really disgruntled or people who are extremely happy and just and it misses the common ground of we all know there's no such thing as a perfect job in a perfect company. So you miss sort of the big middle of people who, yeah, there's some good things about it, there's some bad things about it. But the optimal thing that I think you would look for is what we refer to as work-life balance. That seems to be sort of a key word in terms of what the culture is like. So that's what. So I would be careful with Glassdoor, but I think, and also there are another thing you might want to look at. There's certain user groups on LinkedIn that you might want to take a look at for DevOps jobs as well too. And they're typically people there will post comments on companies as well too. But you're right, it's going to be more about the culture of the company than it is about the industry or company that you're in. I personally don't work on many DevOps roles myself, so I'm not sure I would be the best person to advise you on that.
So the question was about ML ops, like machine learning operations.
Machine learning operations.
Yeah, the person putting in the AI model or the data mining model.
Again, the technology companies, I would say the more traditional companies like the financial services and fintech companies are doing that. E-commerce companies. Any company where they have massive amount of data that they have to sort of wrangle and make sense of and put them into production is where I think you're going to have the greatest success. Some startups might be a good choice as well, because they may want someone who's seasoned to come in and be able to kind of guide that effort. But the downside with startups is that you're generally working crazy hours and it's not low stress. I think your best bet would be to look at some of the traditional companies that are getting involved in that. I think there you would probably have a balance between doing work, valuing people who are seasoned, and may have a more accommodating work-life balance.
I would suggest taking a look at taking a contract job. That way, you can check out the company, they can check out you. It's low commitment. Yeah, that's what I would do, is go contract.
Do you have any good places that for employee reviews, or employee reviews don't come in much to the candidates?
Well, that's when you have to look at your contact list on LinkedIn. Who do you know that works there?
Mm-hmm.
Call them up, or ask people who, I'm considering a job here. Who
Sure.
do you know? Because there's not, like Howard said, Glassdoor, no, don't listen to Glassdoor. It's a bunch of disgruntled people. And it's just, it's the same people, and a lot of them are fake,
Mm-hmm.
not real people. So, Glassdoor is like, no.
Okay, fair enough.
I think groups like this are tremendously helpful. People kind of in the community that you could network with and probably get some pretty honest answers. I've never once recruited for a company that has openly said we don't have good work-life balance. Every company is, oh, we have great work-life balance. And
I want to hire somebody I can grind a stone.
there's actually another topic, but they did say that. But most companies the hiring managers aren't going to advertise poor work-life balance. But the reality is, here in Silicon Valley, there's pressure, there's stress that's existent. Asking good questions to the individual contributors during the interviewing process usually gives you good insights into what that work-life balance looks like, how rigorous those deadlines are, because no company is going to come out and say, hey, we're putting in 60, 70 hours a week right now to get this stuff done. Oh, we have great work-life balance. we really value that. And then you talk to the people that work there. I think that's how you really get some good insights into what that looks like, going through the interviews and asking individual contributors.
Yeah, and really leverage your network, as Linda said. That's really important. Whether it's your LinkedIn network, whether it's networks for organizations like this. Again, at LinkedIn, you can join specific user groups that are tailored to very specific subject areas. So if you're looking for ML operations discussions, you can find several groups like that on LinkedIn. And don't be shy about posting comments. People tend to be helpful. So they'll respond to you. Just make sure you have your ear to the marketplace and really listen to what the market is telling you.
So here's a question from Tom Moran, one of our volunteers. Some years ago, new physics PhDs used to get hired on Wall Street as quants because of their math skills. Are there similar transitions today into computer science? And I would say, yeah, I've definitely looked at people like that, especially on their projects, that they've been involved in a lot of programming, if they've been involved in, the Python, scikit-learn kind of things, and especially in the IoT, Internet of Things. We're dealing with physics, mechanical engineering, organic chemistry. So, for my team, I like to have a variety of skill sets, not only computer science. But I think that's been the case even when I was back at American Express doing targeted marketing in the 90s. They were math PhDs or physics PhDs like that. Scott, you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I agree 1,000%. We place a lot of folks with physics backgrounds. You probably don't get a master's or a PhD degree in physics without being pretty smart and really good with solving problems and math and equations and time series. And a lot of that is very, very relevant to what you're going to be doing at a company. So I would say that degree is tremendously relevant, even to more companies than not. Like Greg, what you said, the IoT companies. We work some really interesting satellite technology companies here, leveraging at that. And I mean, there's so much physics involved. So there's tremendous overlap, and we place a lot of folks with physics degrees.
Same with me. I would say the same thing. Not just physics degrees, but computational biology is another one that's meant as well too. Computer, especially when they can be applied to things like computer vision.
And actually, there's a lot more supercomputing grants for the hard sciences than computer science people. To be honest, I mean, for the really large data problems. Linda?
I don't know that I have anything to add. I would agree with
okay.
Comments for sure.
Sounds good. A question from Dominic. I'm in a 6-month data analytics boot camp. I don't know if I read this already. I have a strong math background and I'm struggling with statistics. What would you recommend I should do? Should I enroll in a coding boot camp instead? And then there was a reply. I'm more interested in coding and I am comfortable with it. So I think one thing might be, I don't know if you can pause your program and take some statistics in intro to statistics kind of class, or if you have bandwidth for that. But maybe switching over to coding could be a good idea. I mean, you have to get some foundational things that you're articulate in. You have to be articulate in numerical literacy and articulate in programming and implementing things and in problem solving. So there's a number of disciplines to overlap. But Linda, do you want to go first?
Yeah.
6 months.
I think you answered your own question. If you said, you're really not getting into the statistics and you'd like to code anyway, pivot. The sooner you do it, the better you'll be.
Yeah. And it doesn't stop you long term from getting into the statistics. You can still do it, but a lot of times if you're in a job search, it's better to do something small, of narrower scope and be competitive at something. Howard?
I would agree. I don't have anything to add. That's
okay.
Whatever Linda says, it goes.
Sounds good. Scott, any comments?
Agree.
Okay, cool. That's fine. Okay, so this is from Oksana. I am a data analyst trying to get into data scientist. Recently graduated from OMSCS, which is an online master's in computer science from Georgia Tech, specializing in machine learning. No machine learning at work. I'm doing some Kaggle projects to get more experience to put on GitHub. What else would you recommend? I mean, frankly, when I was first trying to get into AI, I was doing lots of database stuff. And I was doing some consulting on the side, and I finally offered to build an AI expert system for free, both to get a good reference and to get a reference letter and for the next paid AI work. So one way is if you find, there's groups like data mining for doing good. You could find some interesting applications for getting some hands-on experience, possibly with a charity or nonprofit. Then you're less on a critical path, and you can gain some experience. Something like Kaggle can get you experience, but I would say Kaggle lacks the deployment. One of the things I talk to people about is, have you stressed at night on having, if you're going to spend 9 months to build a baby, you want to see that baby walk. And so people that have had a chance to put something into production, so even if it's on a volunteer basis, getting something that you could put into production would go a long way. But you could start off with small complexity. Anybody want to answer Oksana, a data scientist?
I would say, Oksana, if your company isn't willing to take your skills and pivot to what you want to be doing, you need to look for a new job.
Yeah, exactly. Scott, any comments?
Yeah, and I agree. And I think, I don't know if Oksana's faced this challenge, but we see it again is, I think some companies are unrealistic these days in what they're in hiring. And I think more companies need to be open to the idea of hiring on potential and doing some teaching and some training on their end. So, candidate advocacy and people to advocate for what you've done well. And it's been mentioned earlier, leveraging your personal network, whether LinkedIn, and seeing who had your similar skill set from your company and where they've gone on to, and people that can advocate that you're gonna be able to look, again, what one company calls data analyst, another might call it data scientist, and that's a title thing, but who's going to give you that opportunity to take your skill set to the next level, and leveraging your network and trying to get candidate advocacy to give you a chance.
Yeah, I think you need to look for another job or a company that's going to embrace what you want to do if you're not going to get it where you are. I think having the projects on your resume are great because you want to demonstrate you have the technical ability to do them. So I think that's important. It's a good thing that you're doing that. But I think if you do that, plus with what Greg said, I think it's time to move on.
Right. This is a good question from Lisa. How about women who have taken time off to raise a family? Is that truly a negative, even if professional certifications exist and recent to experience exists? So, I mean, just from my perspective, no, not at all. A lot of times if there's a gap in work experience, the main concern is a person being kind of flaky who might leave. I'm reluctant to hire somebody who has a bunch of 8-month jobs, unless it's a contract. But if there's a reason that wouldn't impact future employee behavior, I think that would not be a problem at all. And also a lot of times I've worked with people with young kids and they can give them some flexibility and they're very motivated and very loyal. So I like to give flexibility. I like to invest in people to have them invest. Other comments for Lisa?
Well, I'll comment as a woman and having 3 kids myself that are now young adults. It's hard. That work-life balance, having kids, you're doing it all, and it's crazy. So a lot of women do drop out. I mean, it's just a reality that you can't do it all. And they have a lot of pressure to, be at home. So, I feel for you in making those kinds of decisions. I think what's really important is to remember that technology is continuing to change. And so what you were using, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago is probably not what you're going to jump into. So if you were using SAS, and you've not taken a look at Python or worked with it in any way, shape, or form with data, you're going to have a problem getting back in. I mean, I think, just to pull some data that we had, back in 2016, so this was 5 years ago now, Python was only 20% of the market, R was 42%, and SAS was 39%. And now it's completely flipped, where it's mostly Python, and a little bit of, SAS is now the smallest, and R is almost as small. So it's, it's changed completely. So what's really important if you are going to step out of the workforce is you do not let your skills atrophy, because it will be very difficult to get back in. And everybody likes to say, oh yeah, we're open to hiring people coming back, after a break or after taking care of family. The reality is it's really hard. So I'm not going to sugarcoat that.
Yeah. Follow up on latest conferences, proceedings, watch videos, read papers, try code.
The other thing I would just say that, unfortunately, you might have to come back in at a lower salary than when you left if your skills have not. I mean, I've seen that happen where again, it's unfortunate, but sometimes you should also be a little flexible, I think, in terms of what you may be able to command in the marketplace, because you might have to take a little step back to move forward. Unfortunately, again, but
yeah, it's it's interesting. We did a survey very recently, and some of you may have participated in it. But we asked people whether or not we gave them a choice. If you had a choice to work from home or work back in the office 100% of the time, which would you choose? And of course, what won? Work from home won. But then we took that information and we divided it by level. And what we found was that the highest percent of people who wanted to return to the office was, anybody going to guess?
Youngest?
That's right, the youngest. So the people that were in the first 4 years of their career wanted to go back to the office. Not, it wasn't a majority, but still that was the highest percent. It was like 40%, 45%, something like that. So I thought that was really interesting. But the people who did not want to come back to the office, about 15% said coming back to the office, were people at what we call the MG1 level, which is exactly when people have young families. So, what does that tell you? I mean, and these are stark differences in numbers at various levels on who's willing to work from home, who wants to work at home versus who wants to return to the office. So, I mean, the young people, my 20-somethings, they want to go back to the office because they like the happy hours and they like the breakfast, the free breakfast, and they like the ping pong at lunch. And, they love all that stuff. Whereas, somebody who's got, 3 kids under 5 years old at home just wants to be home. And if they can cut out a commute, that saves at least an hour of their day. That's huge.
Yeah.
We, Motion Recruitment also hosts a meetup group called Tech in Motion. And just before COVID hit, we had a super impressive panel of female leaders in the Silicon Valley space, engineering leaders, and the whole topic was on women in the workplace. And these were all VPs of engineering. It reached the pinnacle, and they all faced that same challenge of, at one point in their career, took that break, and all were able to get through it though, and so it's possible. Everybody said it's a challenge, but it was great. And then with one of the biggest topics that I hear now in recruiting is diversity in the workplace. Hey, we want diversity, we want diversity, we want diversity, and that means adding females to the engineering staff. And so I think it's on companies, if they're going to say we want diversity, more females. Well, I think some companies, need to be a little more realistic that if somebody had given birth and raised a family, and, it might, like Howard said, might mean maybe taking a slight step back because you haven't been as hands-on recently. But I think responsibility falls on some of these companies that keep saying they want diversity, but are they actually willing to do it?
Right. So Lisa, I'm hiring another data scientist in Q2. So if you meet my job description requirements, talk to me. Kind of a follow-up question to Lisa's about women with family and young kids and people working at home, especially with this COVID situation. It's so hard to have other family members travel and give support. If you have 2 people at home working and 2 little ones, it's a really tough situation. And have you seen have you seen much effect with that in the market? Just kind of difficulty and stresses?
We hear about it all the time.
Yeah.
I have, some of my colleagues at the office are in that very situation. So it's a really tough time right now for young parents and trying to balance, work and home. And that's, everybody's read about the blending of the workday, right? So it goes from, you start at 7 in the morning and you don't stop until 10 o'clock at night, but then you might have to, sort of pivot what you're doing to help with some e-learning or, something else that you're going to have to do for the young kids. And, there's just no getting around that. But then you sort of make up that time sort of later on in the evening after they're in bed. So it's tough.
Yeah, I respect it as a challenge.
Yeah.
There's no playbook for it. This is
Right.
not.
Right.
This is not done, and I'm glad my microphone's not up loud. I have a very unhappy 18-month-old right now, and I think everybody just needs to have some empathy and just be understanding of what people are going through. Employees, employers, like we're all human beings, and we're all kind of going through this. And I think people just need to sometimes take a step back and realize that first is just that. I think everybody's just trying to do the best they can right now.
I mean, we're living through an unprecedented time. We've never trained for this. No one ever anticipated what happened. I agree, but I do think what'll happen, even once COVID goes away, whenever that will be, I do think there'll be a lot more receptivity towards people working remotely, people working hours that are shifted. I think there's going to be an effort made to accommodate people as much as possible, and I don't really see us going back to working from the office 100% when this is done. I think there's going to be more of at most likely some sort of hybrid model where you come into the office a couple of days a week and you're working from home a couple of days a week. I've had clients who I work with who before COVID was, you have to be in the office 5 days a week. You cannot work remotely, and they've gone 100% remote and they don't plan on going back. So it's hard having a family. It's hard working at home when you have kids around. But I think accommodations will have to be made.
Absolutely.
Yeah, our data showed from that survey that I was referring to, we asked people, okay, so if you were given the choice to work from home, how many days per week do you want to be in the office? And the vast majority said 2 days in the office, 3 days outside the office. So the second choice was 3 days in the office, 2 days out of the office.
Okay. This is a question for me, not the audience, but have you heard of companies just liquidating their buildings and saying everybody work from home? It's an expense and it works to have people work from home.
That's interesting that you asked that. I think that people have long-term leases, right? These companies have long-term leases. So we haven't seen it, and I'm sure it has happened.
And there's probably not much demand to sublease either.
But exactly, right? So, I mean, it's worst case scenario for, you know, people that own real estate, commercial real estate. It's terrible, but I think it will happen. As leases expire, they're going to reduce their footprint or they're going to eliminate it entirely.
Mhm. And just to let you know, our firm did that already. We got out of our lease and took smaller office space with the understanding that even when things return, people are not going to be in the office full time. So I think you'll see that in corporate America as well.
Okay. Lewis asks, from your experience, what is a salary multiplier? Like 1.5 times, 2.2 times, between what is the correct order? Like a business analyst, B, a BI data analyst, C, a data scientist, D, a data engineer, E, a developer. Well, I guess you'd have to have a multiplier on some, whatever the minimum job is.
Right.
So if you figure out what the minimum job is, I don't know if that'd be a developer or business analyst. And then just on top of those, what the multiples are. So Linda, it sounds like a question up your line. Do you want to start?
Well, that's a tough one for me to just respond to on the fly. I don't know. What do you guys think? Don't ask me. That's a hard question.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, there's multipliers. I thought you were going to ask multipliers for location.
Oh, okay.
Level. You know, not between disciplines. I think that's hard to do on the fly. I'd have to think about that a little bit more.
Sure.
You know what I mean? It's Howard, Scott, you might have other ideas. I don't know.
Well, I'm always leery of when everyone says 1.5, 2 points, you know, arbitrarily putting what a salary multiplier in there, and it varies so much by company and industry. And again, I come back to it, you know, you're saying data scientist, data engineer. Well, it really depends on what they're doing and how critical they are to the organization.
And then there's the machine learning engineer.
Yeah, there's just not enough context here to provide you with a meaningful answer here.
Right.
No.
Right.
Go back to the salary survey. Look at the data.
Yeah. Well, the salary
Calculate your own
survey,
multipliers.
yeah, the salary survey itself is looking at predictive analytics professionals and data scientists. It's not looking at engineers. It's not looking at BI specialists. It's very focused on the analytics disciplines.
Yeah. But then find a similar survey in other computer science fields and then compare across those.
Yeah.
Control variables, years of experience, degree, location.
Right. Right, which is kind of that's how salary surveys are set up. I think, you know, at some point, hopefully we're going to look at some data this year on developing the same kind of, you know, sort of statistical rigor around salaries for data engineers. So look out for that. That'll be interesting to see. Because nobody's done that yet that I've ever seen. I mean, unless somebody can point me to information on data engineer salaries, it's just too new.
Any comments, Scott?
There's not enough context to provide a relevant answer, and it sounds like Linda's salary guide she's been doing this for years. We also have our own, you know, salary guide from data that we've gathered over the years through Motion Recruitment. But I mean, yeah, it'd be pretty tough to come up off cuff with a answer to that question without a lot more context. And
that's fair. So Sue's asking, as recruiters, do you see more analytics roles being requested on the demand side of organizations, such as marketing, sales, finance, or are the roles being requested on the supply side? So, for example, BI groups, data science groups. And sometimes I would consider this like a cost center or profit center. You know, profit center would be marketing, sales, bringing in revenue to the company, whereas like IT is kind of a cost center. Might be another way, but Sue cast this as demand side, closer to the revenue, or supply side. Any responses? Anybody want to take this first?
Yeah, I could say that there are companies that are data science providers that are offering data science solutions to clients, where they're looking for people who can build out data science applications for clients, and then they can monetize it or sell them. So just like traditionally when people are looking to place people within analytics consulting firms, you're seeing the same thing on the data science side too. People who can come in and develop data science solutions that can then be sold to a client, then repurposed and sold to other clients. So yeah, I do see an increase in that.
So Sue was asking about more roles. So if you counted the number of jobs in a cost center versus profit center, do you think
it's still primarily cost center, but we are seeing more roles open up on the demand side as well too.
Okay.
Especially because there are companies out there that want to build data science and machine learning capability, and they don't have the resources themselves. So they hire firms to do that for them. So the answer is, yeah, I'm seeing more of those roles as well too. Typically, those people, they tend to not only also have to be good data scientists, they also have to be client facing as well too. And sometimes some people who are great data scientists are not necessarily client facing. So it's a pretty unique skill set to be able to talk the talk and walk the walk, but absolutely. And I think we'll see more of those roles come in.
The other role that's emerging is product management within organizations. So as Howard was talking about, lots and lots of companies are thinking about ways to monetize their data in order to package it up. And so they need people with a quantitative background who are actually data product managers. And that's something that, 10 years ago, I mean, it might have existed at a place like an Epsilon or something, but it really didn't exist as widely as it does now, where we get that request all the time now. And it's, it's pretty new. I think it used to be called something else, like maybe a decision support person or something like that. But product management is an area that's growing tremendously.
And I think just, my summary of what I'm saying is we're just seeing huge demand everywhere. It's, I think, as Howard was saying, we're seeing more roles on that side, but we're just seeing large demand with lots of roles everywhere. If you have that skill set, there's probably a role for you.
A lot of people also, I mean, this is getting a little bit off in a different direction, but what I've noticed too is candidates are more inclined to want to understand the mission of the company more so than they ever have in the past. So, what they don't want to do necessarily is, peddle a product that's not good for people, right? And they're much more interested in, what's the mission, and they're interested in mission driven. You can see that in the growth of health tech is an area that lots and lots of people are getting into because they want to be a part of the solution, when it comes to curing cancer, and all these health tech organizations that are really trying to do just that, or any other, sort of chronic and difficult disease. So it's not just about, going to work for a not-for-profit. These organizations are definitely in it for the money, but, their ultimate mission is something that people really resonate with now more than they ever have in the past.
I think post-COVID especially.
Yes. That push that.
Mahasha asked, what's the recruitment trend for foreign candidates? Remote, contract. Are there any recruitment trends that have been changing in the last year or so?
I mean, I think one of the biggest trends I've seen is just obviously the remote work, since our model has been local. I'm not sure if that answers her specific question. Obviously remote is something that's very prevalent now, is the biggest change and trend that I've seen.
Okay. Lawrence asked, is there a U.S. data science professional organization worth joining, such as IEEE, ACM, AMSTAT, etc.? Well, for myself, I am a member of ACM. That's why I'm involved here. And I've been going to the KDD Data Science Conference, or the Data Science SIG group for a long time. But I'm sure other people have other good experiences. But look at the conferences and look at the local, if you're in the publication area, look into conferences. If you're in the local area, look into meetup type of things. Other comments from audience members or panelists?
Well, there's a couple of groups. There's Informs, which is a big group which you might want to take a look at. There's also, I don't know too much about it. There's also the American Association of Data Scientists. Those are in addition to the ones Greg mentioned, those may be worth checking out as well too.
How's Aruna is asking, how is the demand/supply for data science implementation, putting models into production in the cloud and et cetera? So have you seen much demand for this? Have you seen much in the way of supply of people looking for that? So this kind of like, it gets into the AI ops I was mentioning earlier.
Right. The engineers, right. Huge demand.
Yeah.
You know, if you can't put your models into production, why'd you build them? Right. Would be my question.
Right.
I have a question.
Sure.
So everybody's reading about this exodus from San Francisco.
Oh, right.
Is that real? Is that just the press making a big deal about a few people moving out? What is that?
What have you noticed, Scott?
A few, and I think it's more news related. Sure, I've talked to a few folks here locally that have left and gone to other parts of the country. It rained this weekend, but it was 75 degrees here last weekend in the middle of January, and the Bay Area is still a very desirable place to be. The housing market.
We're supposed to get 9 inches of snow tonight. So.
Yeah. The housing market, I've seen 2 houses within a block of me go on and off the market in less than a week. Home sale prices continue to go up. So if there is this mass exodus, I've talked to a few people that have left and said, hey, if I could go work remotely in another part of the country and have a cheaper cost of living, I'm going to go do that. And for some folks, it makes sense. I haven't really talked to too many people that are just exodus all out of here.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard companies say that they will not add to their San Francisco presence. Charles Schwab comes to mind.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Who?
Charles Schwab.
Oh, Schwab, right.
Right. I mean, they're expanding in Denver and they're expanding in Austin and Dallas. They will not add any quantitative people to San Francisco.
I mean,
so you know, I'm hearing those kinds of stories. I'm also hearing about people that have moved because of COVID and moving out. I would love to hear if that's really real. And I hear it in the press all the time, but I don't, you know.
I used to go to a meetup every other week or so, and I talked to lots of people, not so much in the last year. So I really haven't been hearing direct stories. I mean, I've been seeing the same news, but I haven't, in the people I'm connected with, I haven't seen that many move far away, but I can definitely see, I can see where it would make sense. You know, if you have the option to work remotely, might as well live in a national park or somewhere beautiful or a nice location that's a lower cost of living.
Yeah. Well, I'm hearing about moneyed people too, you know, VCs, private equity people moving to Miami.
Yeah, there's a lot of movement to Miami.
Yeah.
Oh, Hammett has asked a question. He was involved in the IADSS. What do you think about job descriptions in different companies? Every company seems to define roles differently. How can that get better? Also, what are best practices in ensuring technical skills so companies can match the right person to the right job?
You know what? The reality is hiring managers hate writing job descriptions. They can't stand it. So they pull an old one, and this is the reality. They will pull an old one off the shelf, change a few words. They have a boilerplate that they use, and they change like 3 sentences and they throw it out there because they don't want to spend any time on it.
So do you think if an organization that had standard data science roles provided job descriptions and made it easier for hiring managers to say, oh, let me grab from this source, maybe if we wrote up a library of job roles?
Well, the trouble with that is that organizations define data scientists differently
Definitely.
and what they do. So, yeah, this, I mean, so I think all I can tell you that hiring managers don't want to do it. HR people sometimes do it, but they don't necessarily understand it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's something that it's just going to continue to be something that has to be that's going to be a challenge. I don't think there's ever going to be a centralized place that can write the optimal job description that you can get repurposed for other organizations.
Well, I would say there'd be variations, just like there's a medical doctor, and then you can be an oncologist or an ophthalmologist, or there's all these medical specialties.
Right.
So if you had a job description and then the different variations and specialties, if
Right.
That's more pragmatic, and you find the one that's closest, and then it gets tweaked by your local technology or vertical.
Yeah, but let's face it, nobody takes a job because of a job description, or at least you better not.
Of course.
Right. So a job description is important, but it's just
It's a template is all it is.
Well, every company defines the roles differently. How can that get better? So it's an open-ended question.
Can I make a comment here?
Sure.
The same problem exists for the roles in any part of programming or IT has for decades, seems to me. In other words, that they're defined differently in every company. The same title doesn't mean the same thing.
No. Right.
Yeah.
And never will.
Yeah.
It's not like the medical doctor profession, where the doctor on the West Coast is kind of going to do the same thing as the doctor on the East Coast. If you're in a different industry, the way you do your job is going to be significantly different than somebody in a completely different industry.
Yep.
Any thoughts, Scott, or you're fine?
No, I think I wouldn't have much value to anything that everybody has said. Is
Okay, that's fine. Lisa asked, I'm a product designer with human-centered interface skills, but I don't program. I've taken Python and other CS classes years ago, but in all caps, I do not like programming, end caps. Any suggestions? I would suggest maybe product management, account management around data science, something that doesn't involve programming, but has some amount of numerical literacy to interface with the data scientist. Think of, if the total ideal data scientist is a geek that can speak, be the speaker.
Yeah.
Geek.
One
idea.
UX, just be a UX product manager person.
Yeah. UX designer.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
totally agree. Not.
No.
Don't worry. The job does not involve programming. If you do not like programming, don't go into a role where that could come into play.
Sure. Okay. What's the difference? Karen asks, what's the difference between data engineers and ML engineers? Is it becoming a more common distinction? I would say a data engineer is more on the upcoming side, the data coming in. The ML engineer is on putting the model into production after the data scientist does it. Would be something that would be my intuition. Other comments?
I think you have that right.
Yeah.
I think also, and I'm not really sure exactly why this is, but ML engineers tend to be a little more statistical, more quantitative. And I think it's because they're a little bit closer to the models themselves.
Okay. Lisa asked Linda Burtch.
Yes.
I think I know the answer, but I'm just going to ask the question. Would you reveal the survey source and data of the salary survey?
Well, what do you mean? What?
Lisa asked, she said to Linda Burtch,
Yeah.
would you reveal that survey source and data?
Well, all the data is, we don't reveal individuals' salaries at all, obviously. But it's on our website. You can go to our website and check that out.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm thinking we should probably wrap up. I'll just open it up. Any closing comments any of you want to make? Scott, do you want to wrap up with anything?
No, I think the questions were all, fantastic. It seemed to be a lot from the job seeker side, were a lot of the questions that came in. And what I'm seeing in the market is that if there are people hiring on this call that just didn't want to ask, it seems like they're having more trouble right now than the job seekers. So if there are any folks on this call that are hiring that just didn't want to ask some questions, feel free to reach out here in Silicon Valley. But the market is as competitive as I've seen it in the 10 years of doing this. There is a huge demand for top talent, and speaking to groups like this is always fun and exciting and interesting, and I always learn things from these conversations. So thank you, Greg, for hosting, and Howard and Linda for your perspectives and chats, and thank you for all the questions.
Yeah, thank you, audience. It's been a great audience.
Yeah.
Really good
Yeah,
question.
definitely.
Really good questions.
Right. It's fun to do these because I always
Yeah.
learn something new, and I love that. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Now, the only thing I will say, since like most of the people on the panel are listening are job seekers, there's never a bad time to look for a job. I mean, if you decide that that you want to make a change, or that you want to test the waters, as Scott says, the market is booming right now. But you should never feel, a lot of people say, well, I want to wait till April to see what happens. If you're ready to start looking for a job, just put your hat in the ring and see what happens. Companies are always hiring, I said at the outset, and the hiring is much more robust than I would have anticipated. And feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah. I think also, lean on your recruiters to give you advice. When you're, whenever I'm working with somebody, I think it's really important to get into a conversation about, what you're looking to do and really brainstorm about career strategy, because it's so important to think about your career from a long-term perspective. It's not just about this one change. It's really about how is this going to impact the rest of my career and the rest of my life? And so you really have to think about it. Early on, it's okay to kind of bounce around and try different things. But once you get beyond about 7 or 8 years, you really have to think strategically about each and every move you make, because your moves should become much more stretched out at that point. So strategically, you have to make sure you're making the right decision. And Howard, myself, and Scott, certainly, we've seen a lot of people who do it right and a lot of people who do it wrong. So it's a recruiter that knows the industry that can really help you work through all that and make sure you're finding the right place. It's really important.
And make sure, and to echo that, make sure you're working with a recruiter who listens to you, and really takes the time to understand your needs and what you're looking for. A lot, there are some out there who don't. So I think it's important that you do that.
Right.
So, and thank you for everybody. And I apologize if I didn't get to all the questions. There's many more questions than we had time for, but I'd like to close it up and give a big hand for the panel and also for the audience asking all the questions. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
all.
Bye.
Okay, goodbye.